Today, Rob and I, we're going to talk about continuous delivery and GitOps. We will cover some buttons, just share our thoughts about how you can automate and scale software delivery if you use GitOps, and if you need continuous delivery with GitOps at all. And yeah, we'll just also share our journey, why we even thought about this problem in the first place. But first and foremost, who we actually have for the talk today. So, Rob, you go first.
Yeah, thanks, Kit. I'm Rob. I'm one of the principal engineers at Octopus. I work alongside Kit in developing and thinking about how we deal with these kind of modern deployments of engineers today. And yourself,
Thanks.
Kit.
And I'm Kate. I'm a product manager at Octopus, working with Rob for several years now. Um, for multiple years, we've been working on Kubernetes and Octopus, everything related to Kubernetes features, deployments, live status, and even we contribute a little bit to how you run Octopus on Kubernetes. So this is basically our sphere of interest. For last year, maybe now a bit more, we've been also working on the integration with Argo CD, the GitOps tool, and today we actually mostly for the talk, we mostly use our experience through this like year and a half journey, plus also like contributing from the whole Kubernetes path we have. So when we were working on Kubernetes, we just happened to talk naturally to a bunch of customers and prospects and partners about the best practices and challenges, what they do, why they do stuff the way they do it. And no surprise, in most of those conversations, GitOps surfaced as the framework people use, tools they use, and also people brought a lot of challenges with GitOps to us. Something they didn't really find a way to do or weren't happy about. And yeah, almost every conversation we had about Kubernetes ended up talking about GitOps. And it's not a big surprise. GitOps is a great framework. It suits the declarative nature of Kubernetes perfectly, and it was developed for configuration management. So everything is configuration in Kubernetes, so why not to use it? It's extremely popular. Some conservative reports and surveys will give you numbers about 30-40% of companies using Kubernetes also use GitOps. Some in some other sources, you find numbers like 60 or 70%. So we can probably say that every second company now deploying to Kubernetes would use GitOps in some capacity. But at the same time, being so great, GitOps also introduced certain limitations. And what we learned, those limitations often come when you talk about deployment automation, not just infrastructure management. So, unsurprisingly, if you deploy software with Kubernetes and GitOps, you have a lot of other needs beyond just deployments. And this is what we're going to talk about today. This is the gist of this talk. So we'll dive into this problem space and talk about what GitOps is, what CD is, and why, what tools you have on the market to solve those problems, and how we approach it in Octopus. So this is like a little bit of a journey into our learnings and like how we build stuff. So, but first and foremost, let's start with an intro. So what Kubernetes and what CD is, what GitOps is, and why we use them. Before we go there and I hand over to Rob, I want to have like one disclaimer. So we here talk about GitOps, but when we talk about it, we will commonly refer to examples from the Argo CD world. And that's because Argo CD is just by far the most popular GitOps tool. That does mean that all of this knowledge and thinking is not applicable to other tools like Flux, for example, or something else. But yeah, we just use Argo CD as the most popular shortcut. So yeah, let's go into that. Rob, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kit. Yeah, it's interesting, right, that a lot of people seem to get into this world of GitOps and forget about continuous delivery or get confused about them. So let's first work out what these concepts actually are. So continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is a specific DevOps practice, and its core mission, its core sort of reason for existing is emphasizing the idea that you want your code always to be ready to ship to production at any point in time. So it's fundamentally, it's about reducing all that risk that comes with deploying to production. Key part of this is automation. Automate. You've probably heard that before. And it's about bringing the pain forward. The idea being that all the processes and steps that you go through when you're actually shipping to production, you want to go through that as early as possible. Now, if you ship, the longer that feedback takes, the more expensive those mistakes become. So you want to create those really short feedback loops and learn as early as possible about bugs. Continuous delivery, it's often sort of talked about in relation to these other concepts, continuous integration and continuous deployment. Continuous integration is really just a sort of a subset of continuous delivery. And it's talking about ensuring that you get your code integrated into the sort of mainline code base as often as possible. Idea is to ship small pieces frequently, because again, the smaller the changes are that you're making, the less likely that you are to run into problems. Continuous deployment on the other end of the scale, that's about getting those changes shipped all the way into production. That's kind of that one step forward from continuous delivery, but it still really encompasses that idea of repeating that deployment process again and again in an automated way. Continuous delivery has really been common in engineering. It's been a common engineering practice for the past few decades, right? So it's not a new concept. I'm sure a lot of you are used to sort of automating parts of your process, but it's just, I think the way it's interpreted is changing a little bit as we kind of start picking up new tech stacks. And I think there's been some of these kind of basic concepts that have been lost. The key is that you want to rerun that release process as often as possible. So let's have a little look a bit deeper about what that release process is. So when we look at that one little box in there, the release itself, I want you to keep this diagram in mind, right? So the actual act of updating the application, that's just one small piece of the flow. You know, whether you're deploying to dev or staging or production, you still essentially want that application out in the world to be updated. But there's a lot of other processes that go around that. So, you know, it doesn't matter if you're deploying to VMs or serverless, or with GitOps and Argo CD these days, the same applies to Kubernetes. The idea is that application update is one step. There's many other parts that are involved. Some parts of it are repetitive. So for example, we're always going to be wanting to run, let's say, smoke tests against everything, or maybe you're doing blue-green in staging and then doing blue-green in production. Again, that speaks to that repetitive motion that we discussed earlier, helps to kind of reduce the surprises that come from it. At the same time, though, there's parts of that flow that might be specific to that stage itself. So, you know, maybe you're doing manual approvals or like using ITSM approvals in production, or maybe you're doing ephemeral environment provisioning in dev and it deprovisions once that deployment's completed. So the idea being that in this release process, there's parts that are repetitive, there are parts that might change across environments, but there's fundamentally parts of that are more than just the application being updated itself. Slide. So we talked a little bit about CD. Let's have a little chat about GitOps and what it is and how it fits into all this. GitOps, it's sometimes been stated as an operational framework that uses Git as the single source of truth for managing and automating infrastructure and applications. There's a little bit more to that. Fundamentally, GitOps is a framework, right? It's got a set of 4 key principles that are about helping to make deployments to environments like Kubernetes simpler and more predictable. So the first principle here is about being declarative, right? Essentially, what you want to do is define the state that you want your system to be in, and that's basically your input into the process. All right, so you've probably seen Kubernetes manifests or Argo applications or even Terraform files. That's kind of that declarative state, right? It's defined not imperatively. It doesn't define what the process should be. It just defines what the state should be. So this, coupled with the versioned and immutable principle, is why it's often assumed that Git must be a key part of GitOps, and it's kind of in the name, right? Why? Of course, it must be Git. The reality is, though, there's other storage mechanisms that fit the bill, and as we'll see when we talk about Argo, there's others that are often used. Pulled automatically, the third principle, that's a little bit of an odd one out. I think it speaks a little bit too much about the how rather than the what. The reality is that for some scenarios, pushback-based mechanism sometimes is optimal. So I'll be a little bit controversial here. I think the pulled principle shouldn't be taken as such a strong requirement as the other 3. The last one, though, is continuous reconciliation, right? And this is one that for a long time, I myself wasn't really sure how it fit in, how important was it, what did it drive, what was it trying to solve? But I've since come to realize that this is probably one of the most powerful parts, one of the most powerful principles of GitOps, I think. Continuous reconciliation describes this idea that you should have your desired state, and you should have some tool, some GitOps tool, which is continually comparing that state with the rest of the world and ensure that it's always kept in sync. Right, and this is pretty powerful. What that means is we can look at some declarative configuration and provide some statement about our understanding of it being an accurate picture of the world. What that means, essentially in practice, is you'll have that desired state stored in Git or wherever else it is. You'll have that GitOps process that's sitting there watching that desired state. And it's also watching the current state of that system in the world. When there's drift between them, that GitOps tool will adjust the current state of the world. So it might be doing applying some manifest to Kubernetes, ensures they've brought up the state, and then keeps watching it. So it kind of happens in this, what's called a reconciliation loop. So what's it all trying to solve? Well, it's no coincidence that GitOps and Kubernetes are typically spoken together more than any other platform or tech stack, right? Kubernetes combines both your infrastructure configuration state and your application state in a single set of manifests. And it's from this particular medium that GitOps is formed, right? When you define your configuration in that manner, it becomes a lot simpler to define it declaratively, right? It makes your intentions very clear and unambiguous about what you want the entire state of the system to be. With continuous reconciliation, we can then have that confidence that we know that that system is in that state and remains in that state. So we can see how GitOps is something that governs state. It's not really describing the delivery flow. It's not the release process itself. It's just a step in that applies those changes you want, performs that deployment. And additionally, this is the big light bulb, I guess, of GitOps. It ensures that after that deployment takes place, it's also kept in sync. And that's something that you don't often see in sort of more conventional processes. So we've talked about Argo CD. Kit's mentioned Argo CD a few times. How does it fit into the picture? Fundamentally, Argo CD is just one tool of many that supports these GitOps style deployments specifically for Kubernetes. So as mentioned, Kubernetes, it's the original and most common subject for GitOps practices due to the declarative nature. You could conceivably apply it to other scenarios, but we'll focus here on Argo and Kubernetes specifically because it's the most common. So Argo CD, it will utilize a Git repository as a state store, but it also can use an OCI registry for its declarative state. So notice I said there, it could be one or the other. Just very briefly on what OCI is, it's Open Container Initiative. It defines a set of standards for defining sort of how containers are distributed and stored. But now more and more it's being used for distributing other artifacts like S-bombs or Helm charts. You've probably seen used quite a bit. The key thing to keep in mind is it's not just Git. Git is not the only input into this GitOps process. GitOps, funnily enough, as we went through those principles before, you notice none of them actually talked about Git specifically. So how does Argo CD itself work? Well, as we can kind of see in this diagram, when you make a commit to, in this case, a Git repository, Argo CD there will be sitting there watching that repository, pulls those commits, and then it performs that reconciliation loop with Kubernetes. It'll apply and sync those resources and checks those the state of Kubernetes and kind of performs that in that loop. Notice when we talked about Argo CD here, when I went through that process, none of it really talked about that broader part of the delivery pipeline. None of this process here in this diagram or what we've described in GitOps talks about what we should be doing with our testing, what we should be thinking about when we talk about environment promotion. Argo CD and GitOps really is fundamentally focusing on doing one thing, right? It looks at the configuration that you've defined as being the desired state, and ensuring that the real world matches that. So you can think about its place in your deployment pipeline as being kind of just a slightly more persistent version of a deployment process. It just kind of plays one part in that whole broader thing. In that continuous delivery pipeline, or in that release process within that, maybe you want to do database upgrades, or maybe you need to run infrastructure provisioning only for one environment or not the other. None of this process really talks to that. Not only that, but you want that process to be repeatable for every single environment with different configurations for environments. Maybe you've got multiple environments, or maybe you've got multiple tenants, or maybe you've got multiple regions that you're deploying the changes to. Argo CD is one part of that process that helps you achieve that, but it itself is not continuous delivery. It's not trying to be, and nor should it. Continuous delivery is an imperative process inherently, right? The steps in the process might be defined declaratively, but running that process is inherently imperative. So hopefully from that background discussion, that short background discussion, we can see how GitOps on its own doesn't provide continuous delivery. It's not opposed to continuous delivery, and the inverse is not true either. It's a useful part of that continuous delivery process. Argo CD handles how the deployments happens, not the entirety of that CD workflow. Just like the act of performing the deployment has never been the entirety of CD, the same still holds true in the world of Kubernetes. Again, I'll be a little bit controversial and say that essentially Argo CD and GitOps is just really the newer version of what we used to do when we FTP files to your web server. All it's doing is taking that change and applying it to the world. What is new though, and what is powerful, is the fact that you can not only look at that expected state outside of your deployment, but you can have this confidence that it will continue to apply after the deployment takes place, because it's active outside of the deployment. So Argo CD and GitOps gives you this powerful operational model for how you apply those changes, but it doesn't design your pipeline, it doesn't validate quality, it's not creating those safety gates, it's not ensuring you've got those small batch sizes of changes or really guaranteeing that reliable process. CD still matters, and GitOps is just one part that helps implement that. So I've talked a little bit about the background there of what those concepts are. I'll leave it to you to talk through what some of the problems are that people face, or they kind of get confused with as they go through the implementation.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the great overview. So we talked about GitOps, continuous delivery, Argo CD, and yep, probably Argo CD and GitOps is not the same as continuous delivery after all. But the question we had back in a year ago, the end of 2024, is, okay, we maybe know that, maybe it's true conceptually wise, but is there a problem for people who actually use GitOps? Basically, does anyone actually care about that, right? How can we prove this? So we looked into some data we collected through our research and interviews, but actually also later, earlier this year, a survey came out. So Argo CD community asked their users about the main challenges they face, basically unresolved needs, unmet expectations. And among other things, one particular need became like top one. I think it was like as popular as like 2 out of 3 people voted for it. And this need is support for promotion apps through stages. It doesn't really say delivery automation, it doesn't really say continuous delivery, but it's very clear of what people actually want here. So let's talk about this a bit more. So what do they actually want from this? What do they mean when they say promotion apps? The same survey gives us a bit more details into what challenges people associate with the promotion challenges. If you read the full article on Medium, you'll find way more details. But in a nutshell, when people talk about these challenges, they often mean traceability across environments. I want to know what was deployed when and where. They talk about understanding the app health and status, but not just for this particular app, but for all apps across environments again. So this is like a pattern. People really care about things in the context, not in isolation. Another issue is keeping pipeline definitions consistent. Again, this is about I want to know that the thing will happen in the same order again and again and again. And 2 more are troubleshoot failed promotions, therefore failed deployments in a way, and release gates. So what does it tell us? It tells us that then people think about promotions and name promotions as a challenge. They don't really mean deployments. They mean the full software delivery automation. They mean deployments, they mean orchestration, they mean testing, approval, specifications, all that. And we think about what describes all those problems, what we use to automate all that. We actually talk about continuous delivery. So let's say we establish a demand is there. Okay, continuous delivery or software automation or software lifecycle automation is a challenge for GitOps and Kubernetes. But hasn't it yet been solved? That was our second question on the list. So, okay, if the problem is there, community is great, it's amazing. There are so many people building stuff, new tools come every quarter. So definitely there should be something there, should be a solution available. Is it available though? Before we go into that, we talked about what does it actually mean to have a good solution. Solution should have certain criteria, right? If we want to build our own solution, how we will know what we should focus on? So we worked up this list of like priorities. So first, we thought about a good solution for this problem should offer full automation. Someone cares, but not so many people will care if you can automate just 15% of your cycle, but then you still have to do everything else manually, or like with your custom scripting. So the more you can cover, the better. That was like the one main criteria for us. The second, as important as the first one, is we actually talked about people who ship software, not people who run Kubernetes, not people who manage automation, people who ship software. So for them, the whole deployment cycle, software delivery cycle, it's just a second priority. We should focus on their experience. So they should not be distracted from the main function they work on. We should look at this through their eyes, not through the eyes of infrastructure people or platform engineers. The third, also important for developers, is speed. No one wants to sit there for 4 hours waiting for the change to get tested and went through the pipeline to the production and just then learn that something was broken. So we want those feedback loops to close within like 15 minutes, 20 minutes max. Our solution should be reliable. So think about a good solution. It should allow us to achieve the same result again and again. No one wants to debug every third deployment. And our solution should work at scale. If it works for one team, it's good, but it should work for 5, 10, 15, and in some cases, hundreds of teams. Otherwise, it's just unusable. You can't really apply it to a real org. And finally, no one wants to hire 2 teams of engineers just to constantly manage and develop your in-house CI/CD GitOps solution, right? You need something that is easy to manage and just affordable. Doesn't necessarily mean you pay money for this, but at least like the cost of ownership is low. So having those criteria in mind, let's look at what people currently use. Do they actually have a solution like that? So in the same Argo CD survey, users were asked about the tools they currently use to automate promotion through environments. It wasn't a surprise for us because we did research before, but just looking at the numbers again was kind of revelation. So most people, and this is like I'm talking about absolute majority, still use either in-house scripts that run on CI tools, and we mean here Jenkins being the most popular one, and then GitHub Actions, the close second, and GitLab. So it's really like ad hoc custom in-house automation. Some people build quite sophisticated in-house CD solutions like standalone tools. These might be like hard to manage, but still they exist. And half of the audience, think about it, still do manual promotion. So despite all those problems mentioned before, despite the challenges, people don't have a good tool to solve those challenges. They still do like bespoke or manual solutions. So our conclusion end of last year was, okay, orgs really have the problem. They have to solve this problem themselves. And because they're unhappy, it's obvious that those answers just don't work for them. So then the third question we had is, okay, with all this picture, why don't the current solutions that are already there, like dedicated solutions, why don't they cut it? Why people, if you look back here, why all those solutions combined give us less than 10% of the market share? What's going on there? So here I should give it like disclaimer, and it's true, and it's the honest thing to say about our current state of the whole ecosystem. Most of those tools are very, very, very early. They're still going through like the first couple of cycles of development. They will definitely get more attention and they will get more users. That's no doubts, and we'll see that with the next few years. But also when we analyze that, I think we spotted one thing, and this is our personal opinion here, but I think a lot of those tools, they look at the promotion issue, or continuous delivery issue, or software delivery automation cycle issue through the GitOps lens. So they start from GitOps and they just try to add things here and there to make the scope a bit broader. Let's say I have my deployment, which is configuration update, and I want to add things like a step before and after, like a couple of checks here and there. Or I want to create a sequence of environments to describe how those promotions should, exist one after the other. That's great, but it's not even close to the actual scope of CD, right? When we talk about CD, we talk about I need to orchestrate things. I need to have dependency management. I need to have approvals. I need to update my configuration management. I need to run some testing, and I need to have security validation. So all that is also part of this process. And then we look at how people use those tools. It looks like you still have to do a lot of these things yourself. So basically, you use one of those tools, and you still need to do a lot of extra custom scripting or development yourself. I think this might be one of the reasons why it's not necessarily working for many customers, and people still lean towards like manual deployments or CI tools. So
just to one that data you've got there.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I love about that data, if you go back to that diagram a slide or two ago, is it really sort of points out how, sometimes you get this warped view of the world when you go to conferences and you hear people talking about this tool is what everyone's using and this is what you should be doing. The reality is that's not necessarily the case that's actually out there. So, if your process is still not, fully automated end to end, or you're not using the latest and greatest tool, that's fine. You're not in a minority. The key thing is just think about, okay, what next steps can I do to make things better?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we did. Actually, we were sitting there, end of 2024, and we were just thinking like, can we do anything better? And we got to the whiteboards, spent a bunch of time doing like a round of ideations and more user research and surveys and then prototyping and go back to the drawing board again. And as a result of all that, we actually came up with 4 principles. Again, we built our solution using those principles, but I think anyone else can do the same. So maybe if you build your own in-house tool, not necessarily using Octopus, it would be useful for you too. We found that useful, and we run a bunch of UX testing and realized, yeah, probably it resonates with people. I just want to share those 4 principles with you. So first thing where we started is we really believe in the integrated deployment process. So we're thinking about GitOps as a keystone, as a part of the big thing, the big picture. So we start with CD. We think that we need to model GitOps deployments as a part of the complex process and allow people to do everything else, like model their environments, model applications, model clusters, model the promotion process, and bring manifest update into that versus trying to add to GitOps, like from the inside. So think broad and go narrow, not the other way around. The second principle we used is, and this is maybe one of the most important ones, we really learned that people want, for good developer experience, you want to combine CD and GitOps visibility. Visibility is extremely important. You want to know what's going on in your cluster, you want to know what's going on in your deployments. Unfortunately, in many solutions, you have only one or the other, and you need to, mentally cross-check a couple of tools to get the full picture. So as soon as you bring it all in one place, and you can answer the question, what happened, when happened, is it healthy now, and look at all the logs, both deployment and app side, that makes life way easier. So I think this is essential for a good tool here. Another one is avoid duplication. You don't want to configure things twice. Again, with many solutions we see, you need to configure Argo CD apps, you need to define what app is doing, where it runs, and then need to refer the same app again if you want to include it into the CD process. And then you change something on Argo side, you should keep in mind that now it should change something on the CD side. You're doubling configuration, make it laborious, leads to errors. Essentially, people give up on their solution. So don't do it. Keep one thing, keep one source of truth. And finally, you should follow GitOps principles. All of that makes no sense if you try to automate CD, but forget where you started, and you start with GitOps. So more than often, we see that people doing automation on Argo CD in general try to do something like, oh, I will not update the manifest, instead update just the application configuration, or let's switch off the auto sync and just trigger sync manually, or like, through a tool, or do many other things. What you end up doing is you just trading off GitOps towards automation, forgetting why you started in the first place. So don't do that. We think that both concepts should coexist. And yeah, finally, with all 4 principles again, look through developer eyes. Don't think as infrastructure engineer or as platform engineer. Think as a person who just merged the last commit into main and want to get feedback from the tool 15 minutes later to know if it was deployed successfully, and if there are any issues, have an easy path to resolve that. All right, so if you want to learn more about our process, not just solution, but how we went there, etc., we have a bunch of resources available. We have a big webinar, we have a blog post, docs, and we have samples. I actually would really recommend the samples because you can really see how those things could coexist and work together there. And yeah, finally, like just to summarize within 1 minute, we started with asking ourselves, should you choose GitOps or should you choose continuous delivery? Is there a problem like that? And I think the answer here is, the honest answer is, you don't need to choose. So you just want to use the right tool for the right job. If you're an infrastructure team or you manage configurations and you do the ops task, use GitOps. If you want to automate for delivery, use CD. If you want to automate for delivery for the platform with complex configuration management like Kubernetes, just use both. Don't trade off. Find a way to implement both and benefit from it. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.